Hello and welcome to the Business of Storytelling from Moore's Law Media in association with Vimeo, the platform with everything you need to make, manage and share brilliant videos at vimeo.com. In this podcast, I, Neil Moore, will talk to the leading commissioners and creators of stories to find out what stories are they telling, how do they do it so well, and what can we learn from them. And today, I am joined by Head of Brand at fintech company StashAway, Theresa Pragasm, who has spent an entire career building and articulating brands that you've heard of and that we love. And we're going to talk about the role of storytelling in building a brand, articulating a brand internally as well as externally until we all know what it is. Theresa, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
So before we get into my sort of questionnaire, you have, I don't want to make you feel old or anything, but you have quite a long and storied career. So can you perhaps give us the potted highlights?
Okay, so in a nutshell, I love all things brand. I have been doing this for a long time and I think my passion is still going, which is fantastic. Started off with MTV. I've worked for London Underground, the Mayor of London's office. I've done a whole bunch of things with travel, hospitality. And I don't think I've been in the same industry twice, with the exception of fintech right now. So I moved it from Prudential, Singlife, and then now I'm with StashAway, which is excellent.
Wow. And so how long have you been with StashAway?
About a year and a half now.
And I understand from the press releases that this was a job that was kind of created for you.
Quite fabulous, actually. So I got a call and they actually sent me a creative director role, which is not exactly what I do. And so when I turned around and said, hey, this is not what I do, but here's what I can do for you. And they took it. And I think that's a great company to work for, the sense that they understood where their gaps were and what they needed. And what was really, really fantastic was they were actually talking about this already. So it aligned very much with what they needed for the brand as well. So here I am.
And I guess they need it because Singapore, which is where we are, is positioning itself as a bit of a fintech hub.
Yep.
And as such, we've seen a lot of apps. We had our digital banking licenses come out not so long ago, and we've already seen new banking names hit the marketplace. So there's a lot of people trying to get me to put my limited amounts of money with them and into their apps and into their things. So I guess the need for a brand is need for differentiation in what is quite a crowded marketplace. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I think if you look at the category as a whole, not just fintech, but banks, insurance companies, we've all been trading on the same message for a very, very long time. And I think banks in a category in itself have also commoditized a lot of products. So all people see are numbers versus actually what it can do for you. And I think that's really what we're trying to do as a brand, is to innovate and to actually find products that are relevant for people that you may not have access to in the past. And we're trying to bring that forward in a way. So it's a very exciting time, I think, to be part of a brand that's moving forward, that's trying new things, that's talking to customers, and basically that's just listening.
Well, I think it's nice for you to be able to go in and do something new. Often people in your role are the guardians of what exists as opposed to the creators of what is new, which is quite exciting. And I want to get into a bit later about the process of how you go about doing that. But you mentioned messaging just now. This is all about storytelling, because that's kind of my bag as a former actor and journalist, and that's what my organization is interested in. So to my mind, brands are very long-term sort of narratives. I mean, there are brands that from when I was a kid that have sort of evolved their story over a very, very long time. Do you agree with that? Really, what is the role that storytelling plays in the creation and building of a brand?
Hey, that is a very, very, what's the word for it? It's a very heavy question. There's so many aspects to it. But I think the one thing to remember about brand is that it is only part of what the business does, right? So I always start with the business objectives itself. So what does the business need? What does the business want to do? And then what does the customer need? So the brand narrative is actually answering that. It's actually putting those two things together and going, what is it that we need to give people? And that's the story that you tell.
So what does StashAway need right now? Is it just differentiation, or is there more?
I think there's a lot more to it, right? In a sense, it's a new industry. People don't really understand some of it. So you need to, there's a bit of education, but there's also a need of showing people what this journey is. And money is a very, it's kind of two-sided coin in a way. It's very practical, but it's also very emotional. People have very emotional reactions to money as a whole, right? Whether you lose it or you win, that's a whole emotional reaction in itself. So it is a bit of a harder story to tell. It is a bit of a harder one because you have both the emotional as well as the functional side of it that you need to balance off.
Yeah, money makes me anxious. I wish it didn't. I think it's the sort of lack of financial education I had growing up, and you sort of have to work it all out yourself as an adult. I hear lots of adults saying we should teach more in schools about tax and credit cards and stuff like that. So with the emotional, I mean, people tend to lean towards that being the storytelling opportunity, is in the emotion as opposed to the function, which maybe is sort of, maybe it's benefits and features. I don't know if it splits up that neatly, but how do you think storytelling can help you tap into that emotion? And does it have a role in helping tap into functionality and demonstrating the functional side of money as well?
I think it's a bit of both. You can't just tell the emotion without the payoff, right? So what is this emotion that you're having going to deliver in the end? Or how can we help you in the end? So it's about putting those two things together. And I think one of the things I also always talk to my team about is the narrative aside, that is only the beginning. There is an element of trust that you need to build with storytelling, right? Because I can say a lot of things, but if it's not believable, if it's not consistent, and if it's not relevant, I'm not going to buy into it. So the element of trust, that it really does hinge on these three things. And the other thing to remember as well is relevance is not just about now. Relevance is about the future. And you have to keep changing, you have to keep adapting the brand in order to keep being relevant. And you actually mentioned something earlier, which is about a longer term play. Yes, brand is a longer term play, but if you look at the way the world is changing now, in terms of technology, in terms of how fast things are moving, I often look at vision statements and go, this is not a 10-year play anymore. This is a 3-year play. Where do we want to be in 3 years? Because things are so dynamic, things are changing, and you cannot afford to miss those milestones in between.
David Ogilvy said that a good idea is one that lasts for 30 years. Now, he said that a long time ago, very long time ago.
Yes.
Does that still stand? I mean, the idea of putting the effort and energy into building a brand, which is what you got to do, that may only last 3 years before you have to go and do it all again, is that sustainable?
So here's the thing. The idea can last a long time.
Okay.
The brand story is a narrative that needs to evolve. And when you build a brand story, it has to have stretch. If it cannot have stretch and it doesn't have legs for you to move things around or for you to adapt, and I commit brand blasphemy all the time, trust
That's
me.
a good phrase.
I actually pull brands apart and go, let's try this. If it doesn't work, we'll just put it back together again. And the great thing about fintechs and the great thing about scale-ups is you can do that. You can actually experiment, and that's where we are now with StashAway. We're experimenting. We're trying to figure out actually what is that story we need to tell.
So that's encouraging to hear, because one of the issues as a vendor who works with big brands and big companies, we have this phrase, the brand police. And their job is to police any idea that goes even vaguely beyond the boundaries. And, often you're protecting a sort of quite iconic or totemic brand. So are you able to experiment only because you're sort of a startup or you're a scaling business? Or do you think that's something that can be done by bigger, more iconic brands? I mean, you've worked for Prudential, which has been around forever and ever. And you've worked for the London Underground and these big iconic brands that have lasted, over 100 years now, some of these brands. So where do you think that where are you best able to stretch, and how do brands at different stages of development do that?
So I think with an established brand, again, your initial narrative, your initial story is always there. What is your purpose? What is that reason that you're there for? That always remains. It's how you tell the story that changes. Because, so for example, if you are, I look at Hertz when I first started my career as well.
Hertz, the car
hire company. Yep. If you look at them and you think, okay, they were only focused on rental. Mm-hmm. And the brand was actually built around that, was built around experiences. But then they also started to move into car sharing. And there was talk about electric cars and things like that. So your narrative will still hold up if it has the legs to stretch across these other business arms that you're trying to move into. You just change the story slightly.
At the moment, I'm obviously keen to talk about storytelling and narrative, but equally the things that you're talking about could be termed as offerings or products. Where do you, am I trying to force something into a storytelling kind of mold that doesn't really exist? I mean, am I trying to make everything about storytelling, or is that a natural sort of container for what we're talking about?
I think it's a container. So think of it this way. So business objective, customer need. When you put those two things together, you then end up with a starting point, right? And then that's how you then deliver the narrative. The narrative isn't just about what the brand is. The narrative is also about how you can deliver that need to the customer. And that's where your products and your benefits come in. So one thing I always do with any brand I've worked with is you create a narrative, but you have to have proof points that back up that narrative. If you do not have the proof points, your whole storyline will fall apart. There's no believability. There is no trust. There's no consistency. There's no relevance. So your narrative doesn't hold any weight anymore.
Okay, so let's talk about the process of doing that. I take it you're in that process with StashAway at the moment. So I'm not sure how much you can tell us about it, but it's not the first time you've done this. So I don't think anybody watching this is naive enough to think a brand is just its logo, but that's something you have to build from scratch if you're starting something, and there's a whole process to get there, and there are various methods to do it. What about discovering or creating the brand narrative, the brand story? What are the processes that you go through to do that?
That's a tough question because it is very different for each brand that you go into. The process is actually never the same, but some of the principles still apply, right? And I know people often ask me what my role is as a brand, head of brand. And the thing is, I am not a storyteller. Mm-hmm. What I do is I articulate the business strategy. I articulate the customer need, and I help the business stay on track. So once you take those things, you then start to build your brand framework. And that's where your whole brand strategy piece comes in, right? The vision, your purpose, those things still apply. Those never go away. What I would suggest is keeping it simple. So in the past, I know those brand pyramids had things like missions and values. Honestly, I would keep it down to maybe just your purpose, your vision, and maybe something which I call vision targets, which actually help you to deliver on the vision.
Okay, explain. Is that a you thing, or is that something you've learned and picked up from someone?
No, I think that's something I've picked up. So Decathlon did a really good job of it, and they came up with this, I believe. So in the past, what I think most brand people used to do was we would have value propositions. Yep. Right? And then we would go, okay, this is the customer proposition. This is maybe the employee proposition. And then maybe a corporate one or something else, right? What that does, though, it splits everything up into segments. And it's harder for you to keep that consistency. Whereas if you have what we call vision targets, you're actually trying to deliver on the vision that you have put down. And you go, this is how we're going to do it. And then once you have those targets, it's the proof points below to deliver on those targets. And hence why I come back to the point about visions not being 20 years in the future. Okay. Because that's way too long for you to actually deliver on proof points. That's way too long for you to actually deliver on relevancy for customers. So once you have these vision targets, you keep them to a short time frame. They could be 2 years, 3 years. It really depends on the nature of the business and where the business is currently.
How involved are you in developing that vision? Is that a job for the sort of CEO and then you articulate it, or are you involved in that? I mean, it seems to me you've got a very business approach to it as opposed to a maybe highfalutin, let's make pretty pictures kind of approach. Yep. You seem very grounded in the business. So what's your role in deciding that vision?
So I think there has always been a misconception about brand. And people who actually work in brand must be frustrated by this, but that's not what we do. What we do is not the pretty pictures. What we do is we actually work with the business. And I know, there's all this talk about, it's long-term, it's very hard to measure. To me, that does not matter. To me, what matters is the ability for you to actually work with the people in the business who are driving it. I don't drive business direction. That's something I could never do, but I help articulate it. I help operationalize it. I help people around the business understand what that business objective means for them. And you do that with your brand framework, with your vision targets, with your brand storytelling, with your proof points. These are the things that people working in the business will understand and be able to act on. So it's more actionable in that sense. And then for every team, I actually work with teams and go, okay, what does this brand framework mean for you? How would you then deliver this? And we talk through things like operations or products. So it is not just on the marketing side. To me, marketing is the delivery that I use. It's the output. But overall, in terms of brand, it's working with individual teams for them to understand what their role is. And I'm going to give you a very simple example. If you had a finance team who wasn't paying invoices on time, that affects your brand. Your vendors are also your customers. And it's a very, very simple example. But saying this to someone in finance then helps them understand, hang on a minute, this does have an impact on the brand. It does have an impact on the bottom line. And that's how I play a role in the brand. Because brand always seems to be, that's the prerogative of the marketing team, but actually it's not. So my role is actually to operationalize the business objective and get the customer need right, and then filter that down so that everybody in the business understands the role that they play. So in a way, I am a storyteller, but of a different kind, storyteller of the business.
Well, I think when you talk about articulation, I think the ability to make a finance person understand how the brand matters to them requires an element of storytelling. You need to paint them a picture of why what they do matters and ladders up to what the brand is and contributes to the brand value and all that kind of stuff. So in that sense, I think you are a storyteller, and I think storytelling is one of the best ways we've got of articulating the intangible or the sort of difficult to position to people who perhaps don't understand it. It's a way of translating what you know to what a finance person knows or an operations person knows or whatever. So in terms of articulating the brand internally, externally, what license does this give you to tell stories? What kind of stories do you get to tell to spread the word?
Yes, I think it's an art, right? Storytelling. So I have the privilege of adapting it. So I adapt it for the C-suite. And sometimes it's a more data-driven story, but with a payoff at the end of it. And I help them understand the impact of the brand overall. And then if I work with people within the business, it's really helping them understand how that story impacts their role.
But what's the difference between what you do and what I see a lot, which is painting the mission and vision on the wall in the canteen or in the reception area or something? Does that not do the job?
No, that does not do the job.
Okay, that's a relief.
And I think there is a difference between employee values and brand values, which we often get kind of intertwined. They're actually two different things. And that's why I don't do brand values anymore. I do attributes. So there's a difference, right? When you talk about an attribute, it links directly to the brand. So something like just being simple, that's an attribute because the output is there. You know what the output should be. When you use a value word like innovate, I don't get it, because what does innovation mean for someone in finance? What does innovation mean for someone who works in the call center? It's a very, very tough word for you to absorb. But if I told you as a brand, we're simple, we're straightforward, we are transparent, so we tell people like it is. That's all I need to know.
So these are things that can be quite easily acted upon, and also they're quite easily articulated through the stories you tell.
Yes. I also kind of feel sometimes as brand professionals, we tend to complicate things too much. And
is it you, or is it the people selling you their services as branding consultants, branding agencies?
Yeah.
Because, one of the things as a vendor or a consultant or whatever is you're constantly trying to demonstrate value, and increasingly that value is defined by the amount of paper, the number of slides, or whatever you deliver. It's sort of proof of work, as it were. So as someone who buys these services, or has done, I'm sure, and worked with big branding agencies, I have two questions. One is, how do you, if you're working deep inside a business for a couple of years to find out that story and those attributes and everything, how do you communicate that over to a third party who suddenly you want to use to help you articulate? That's my first question.
Yeah.
My second question is, how do they prove their value to you in a way other than complicating what you've already boiled down to its essence?
So I'll answer the second one first, because that will give you the answer to the first one.
Okay.
Which is, the job of an agency is not to tell me something new about the brand that I don't know. That is what my customer research does. That is what my business objectives do. They give me that direction. What I need an agency to do, and what I look at agencies and how I actually determine if they're the ones I want to work with, is whether they get what I'm saying or not. So with the brief,
Simple as that.
It's as simple as that. Do you get it? Do you understand what we're trying to do as a brand? Don't overcomplicate it, because most of the times when you do, and I've actually only mainly worked with creative agencies because businesses hire me to do the brand strategy. So most of the time what I need from the creative agency is a different perspective of what I'm already seeing.
So you don't need new ideas on the brand, but you need new perspectives on how it could go out into the world.
Yes, correct.
That's good value.
Yeah, that is excellent value, because I am not a copywriter. I cannot do creative work. I have an idea of what I want. I need you to help me elevate that idea.
All right. Good to know. Bear that in mind. Now we're talking about agencies. One of the things is about how you find stories to tell. I mean, you have the story, which is the big brand story, and you've been talking about your customers tell you what that is. Customer research meets business objective, and then you articulate that and simplify that for the business. So I can see where your big story comes from. Now, when you go out to the little stories that sort of demonstrate and articulate that to different audiences and whatever, how do you find those? Where do they come from? Agencies might be one place. Where else do you look?
So a lot of our source in terms of understanding customer behavior comes from two things. One is data that we derive from people being on the app. And the other, which I feel is an excellent source of information, is our customer experience team. The people who speak directly to customers. The people who know exactly where customers are getting stuck. And if you use that, then you have the smaller stories to tell, the more tactical stories to tell, because that you can link back to benefits, that you can link back to product relevancy, that you can also link back to how you improve your UI. So that's really where I look for inspiration from. But having said that, I will also say that customers don't always know what they need. And that's that famous Henry Ford saying.
Oh, yeah. The faster horse. Yeah.
Yes. So essentially, you as a brand also need to understand where your business is going to be. You need to understand the environment. You need to understand the market. And that's where I turn to the likes of my C-suite, my corporate strategy team. And that's why I'm saying the business side of things is so important to brand. I cannot operate without that. And that, for me, is the core of everything I do. It is not the creative output. It is not just the articulation in terms of messages. It is really understanding the business itself.
I'm kind of relieved to hear you say that, because I do find when talking to senior marketers and communicators and things like that, is that there is a constant low-level anxiety that they've not got the relevance they want in the C-suite. It's often the topic of a lot of conferences and podcasts. How do we remain relevant to the C-suite and stuff like that? You seem pretty damn clear on how that is the case. So I think that's a really good takeaway for people watching who, you know, do have that anxiety. Like, make it about the business. Seems obvious, but when we did a little briefing before this, we talked about brand being the architecture, not the interior design. It's not just the decoration, it's actually the core of the business. And I think if we have confidence in that, then our relevance is very, very clear.
Yep.
Do you have any kind of instinct for what makes a good story? I mean, when you see it, because when you're simplifying things, sometimes things can come across as a bit underwhelming if they're simple. I think that's sometimes why we like complication or highfalutin ideas and stuff like that. Do you have a gut instinct for what's a good story, or do you test it, or how do you decide what's a good story?
I think it's a bit of both. So, and I think instinct comes from experience. That's what it is, right? It's your experience telling you that this is probably going to work. But then on the other end of it, you also have to test. And here's the thing. I know in the past we look a lot at personas. I am not a believer in personas.
I feel like they've gone through a bit of a trend. They were the hot thing, and now they're dripping off. And yeah, I find them a little. I've never found one that I've truly believed in I always look at them and go, I've never met that person.
No, because you're putting a whole bunch of behaviors together to create this ideal customer that.
Yeah, they're behaviors that you want, you wish. But often I don't think they really exist.
No. And so you complicate it by creating this person, and you think that this is how this person will behave. It's linear, but it's not. So essentially what you need to really get to is behaviors, and you understand each set of behaviors.
So give me an example. Is this, is a behavior how I spend my money, or what my intention to do with my money is, or what my goals are with my money? I'm trying to save up for my kid to go to college or something. That's a behavior.
Yep. And there are many, many layers to it, right? So that could be one. And then you drop it down, because then it could be, okay, if I'm saving for my kids' education, what do I do next? Where do most people go to for information? So that's another behavior that you can look at. And then you can kind of go, okay, if this is where they're going to for information, then maybe that's where I need to be. So behavior for me comes from a lot of whole different levels, right down to how people use the app, where they get stuck. To me, that is essentially it. I know I'm kind of boxing everything in, but it's easier when you do that, because then you understand people are made up of very different lines of action. And then you work on those lines versus trying to work at a higher level across the board.
So what kind of data and information do you get, and how often do you get it, and what do you do with it once you've got it?
So data is always there. We can access it at any time. And so, for example, if you're working on a campaign and you figure out, what the segment is, you may go to the product team, or you may go to the business and go, can you tell me, with this product, where do people get stuck in the process? Or are they going all the way through? Are they depositing money? Are they, are they withdrawing? How quickly are they withdrawing? Once you understand these things, then you kind of go, okay, that's where the challenge is. And then that's what my message should be.
Okay. Simple, like you said. Yeah. My next question for you are, what do you think are the elements of a great story?
The elements really are what the business need is, what the customer need is, putting those together, and then really keeping consistency, relevancy, and believability in it.
You also mentioned earlier payoff.
Yes.
I think that's the thing that separates a story from a press release.
Yes.
Or a blog, because I think stories are a way of delivering information about an organization or a brand or a product that are as delightful as they can possibly be, and as enjoyable and engaging as they can possibly be, as opposed to something that's intrusive or something that is I think intrusive is the word, be it an advert or be it an email after you purchase something that wants to know 10 things about you because you just you purchased something. So I think for me a story has to be sort of delightful and surprising as well.
I get that, And maybe I look at things slightly differently because I think you can tell stories in very, very different ways. And a tactical ad could also be a story. If I'm really interested in what you have to say, I will watch through it. Do you remember that Burberry ad where they actually talked about the inventor of trench
a
coat?
very cinematic one. Sienna Miller, Donald Gleason. Yeah, that was gorgeous.
They're talking about a product there. That is essentially what they're talking about, but they've made it into such a beautiful story.
Yeah, I mean, that was... I dread to think what the budget on that was. It frightens the life out of me, but it was spectacular. And everybody talked about it.
Yes. And when you read the comments, people are going, oh, I wish we would make this into a film. It was such a great story to tell. So I do think you can actually deliver stories in different formats that still talk about products, still talk about the tactical parts of things. It's just finding that creative way.
Actually, that's a great example of how the features of a trench coat, which we always told, which is all benefits, not features. That's actually about features, but packaged in a story that was surprising and delightful and cinematic. I also think it did a very, very good job of, my understanding is that part of the business objective was to reposition Burberry, which had maybe become a little bit less salubrious or luxurious as they would like. So they wanted to reposition it back as a luxurious brand. And I think that definitely achieved that, or was part of achieving that business objective. Excellent example. What's the process of bringing a story from concept all the way through to the consumer?
It's different every time, I think. I do start out, and I know we start out with narrative. And then I like to look at proof points for what that narrative can deliver. And then I start to work through messaging. And maybe it's a bit upside down, but I like it because that way I can get into the tactical messaging as well. Because when you tell a story, it's not just about the brand. You need to then be able to take it down to the next level, which is the tactical bit of it. And often once you've built the brand story, you kind of go, you wait until the last minute to do the tactical stuff. And then you realize I can't really fit it in as a tactical piece. So I like to switch it around. And I like to go, okay, if this is the brand message and the brand message is about goals and how you achieve your goals, then how would I then deliver that as a tactical message? Is that still going to work?
On the basis that people have different goals, different behaviors, different products, things like that. So you're thinking quite holistically from the outset.
And then going really narrow, streamlining it down, because at the end of the day, this is what the business is going to ask you. The business is going to ask you, how does that impact the bottom line? Right? So that's why I move tactical up and I go, okay, if this is where we are going to make a difference, and it does make a difference, then how do I tell the story from a tactical perspective first? And then I go back and I fill in the rest of the brand pieces.
So sort of what unites all of these tactical stories, there's an umbrella there. We just need to work out what that umbrella is.
So you work out your brand narrative. You know what that brand narrative is. And maybe the brand narrative is, we know that, investing is hard. We know that people don't have all the information maybe. So how do you then help them achieve that? And I think the industry as a whole is starting to talk about goals. Right? Which is fine. And then how does that then deliver on a tactical message? Because if you can't deliver this idea of goals on a tactical message, your brand storytelling is lost. You're going to have two very different angles to come from. And that's where you often find marketing goes down one route, which is making the product very commoditized, and brand has a whole big brand story to tell, and they're both not connecting with each other. And often I think what then happens is then we kind of get to a point where we go, well, brand is long term, it's not going to impact the bottom line now. You're going to see it in a few years. That does not make sense to me. Yes, brand is long term. It's about building awareness and stuff, but it still has to deliver on the marketing pieces. Marketing does not achieve its targets based on just what they're delivering. It is a cohesive collaboration of the two, both the brand story, marketing, everything else you're delivering from a customer perspective, all of those then filter down. So it's a combination. So to me, it's not just about the long-term impact. It is also about the short-term impact.
In Singapore, where I've lived for 15 years, I feel like when I look at financial advertising, there's an assumption that everybody has the same goals. Apparently, every Singaporean wants to send their child to some ridiculously expensive Ivy League college. Everybody wants to retire early. Everybody wants to buy, an outrageously expensive car. Is that truly reflective of the breadth of people we have here and their goals? I just feel like everybody's playing in the same area.
I think that is probably the output of personas.
Right. Yeah.
And that's why I say if you go by behavior, it's very different, because you might say, yes, I have somebody who wants to put their kid through university, but they may be looking at a local university. So then you break the behavior down that way. Like, how do I help you achieve that instead of everybody wants to go to university? Or do you then look at housing? Because I know there's this thing around housing and how people aspire to it. But it's a very different situation here because of the way HDB pulls everything together.
And you wait for your BTO,
Yes.
and the marriage proposal is actually, should we
Yeah.
apply for an HDB?
Yeah, so it's a very different. The goals are very, very layered in a way. That's how I feel. So I don't go by goals per se, and maybe the correct term to use is milestones in life. So where do you see yourself, and what that could actually potentially look like for you?
I have a great anxiety over talking about money, and I realize I haven't necessarily done all the things I should have done. So I recently decided to call 3 companies. I'd heard of them, they were big, and said, right, I want you to send someone to come and talk to me. I'm opening myself up. I'll tell you everything. You tell me what I got to do. And the company I went with in the end for my various needs, and I put everything with them, was because the 2 agents that came to see me from the other 2 companies, I'm not going to name any right now, could not get their head around my goals. So my goal for my daughter was, when she gets to about 19, I want to have a sum of money which she could use to travel, buy a house, start a business, go to uni. And 2 of them were like, but which uni is she going to? I was like, she might not go to uni.
Yep.
Okay. I want her to have a sum of money that she can make a choice with. And they could not get their head around it. And they had no literature that went with it. And they weren't trained to give me any other answer. And there were various other goals. So for example, I've always run my own businesses. I don't intend to retire. I might do more of what I enjoy, or I might do a bit less of something.
Yes.
But the idea that I didn't want to retire, I just wanted to supplement my income so I could have more choice over my work. 2 of the agents could not get their head around it. I mean, they just couldn't. So that's why I picked the 3rd one. How are you demonstrating to me that you understand that I have different needs to other people? I mean, I'm just concerned that there is a really tried and tested and accepted path through life that Singaporeans are supposed to take, and people based in Singapore are supposed to take.
Yep.
My wife is Singaporean.
Yep.
She has the same thing. Is StashAway going to be the people that say, actually, no, we're open to different lifestyles here? I mean, I don't think anyone's catering potentially for the life goals of gay families or gay couples that don't want to have children, or whatever. Is StashAway going to have more awareness of different lifestyles, or is it just easy and profitable to go for the mainstream and tell those mainstream stories about kids going to uni and retiring?
I think there's 2 things. If you want to be profitable, it has to come back down to relevance as well, right?
Okay.
And again, to me, it comes back down to behaviors. And that's why I don't think this idea of putting people on a path works. If you actually go back to individuals and you figure out this group of people actually, like you said, just want to keep going, supplement their income, but at the same time, they have kids and they then have, this pot of money that they want to set aside. You're actually going down 2 streams, and then you're putting that together, and then you're telling the story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but then you add in the fact that I want to make that money ethically. I would like it to be invested sustainably.
And that's another set of behaviors that you just layer on. So it's layering the behaviors on. You're not going by a...
So your narrative needs to be quite modular, because you need to be able to put together different narratives so that you can reach me, who wants not to retire but to supplement my income in an ethical way.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so you're telling different stories. And here comes...
But they need to be able to blend. I think that's what's really interesting. Is I think a lot of marketers and brand people, but often marketers and communicators I talk to, it's sort of one story for one purpose.
And it's not.
This month we're telling this story for this reason.
Yeah.
And actually, I think this idea that people are more complicated than that, and stories, it's almost like remember the pick your own adventure stories, choose your own adventure.
Yes,
It's like that.
yes,
Like
it is a
your
bit like that,
marketing
yeah.
and your stories need to come together in such a way that I can almost find my own unique path.
Yep.
And I think that's an interesting thing where one of the things we've not talked about, won't have time to talk about, is technology, but how that will enable us to sort of blend and bring different story elements together to tell me a unique story just for me.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's happening. It's still very much make one thing, blast it to everybody, and hope it works.
Yes. And again, that's why it comes back down to what I talk about in terms of the tactical messaging, because that's the payoff for the customer as well. Why am I following your brand? Why am I, watching your ads? Is because at the end of the day, I have an interest. I have an interest in being a part of this brand, whether it's to, start investing with you, buying a product from you. So that's why I always go back down to the tactical. And I know in brand, it's not something people do, but that's really where you also understand behavior.
Yeah, you've got me thinking about storytelling as sort of puzzle pieces. The tactical pieces are the puzzle pieces, but they've got to fit together.
They've got to fit together. And that's the challenge, though. I don't think I've cracked it or we've cracked it at all. But we're trying to figure out how you work through behaviors and how you put them together. So today I might be someone who, has kids in university. And so I'm really worried and I'm, trying to make sure that, there's enough money set aside for them. And then in another couple of years, I would have paid it off. And then what? So you're actually layering things on. And with something like investing, which is a little bit longer term as well, that's where the complication comes in, because you're not talking about just the here and now. You're trying to get people to think about future. You're trying to get people to think about, okay, what's the next milestone? And it's not, like you say, people have anxiety with money. So that doesn't come naturally.
The other part of the story is you need to keep me calm.
Yes.
Which is a struggle, right? Because I think a lot of the financial and investing sort of marketing, they want you to be excited about it. I'm like, before I can get excited about it, you need to make me calm about it, because at the moment I'm actively avoiding it.
Yep.
And I don't think I'm the only one. And I think certainly young people who seem to carry a lot of anxiety, particularly around ever owning a home or anything like that, hitting these financial milestones, I think they need a lot of different options and a lot more. I think sometimes when you get involved in finances, you sort of feel like, that's it, I'm locked in now. I have to keep paying this thing for 20 years. Yeah. I've given up any freedom. I think finance brands love to paint an aspirational picture, but what they're forgetting is that there's also, they lock you in. Yes. and they've got to deal with realistically with that anxiety that people feel. And I think that's again where emotional storytelling, honest emotional storytelling, not just, look, this is you and your family on your yacht in 30 years, but hey, are you worried? Are you scared? Are you frightened you don't have enough money put aside? I think the first sort of finance brand that's really honest about how frightening and anxiety inducing finance can be will find an audience of people who've been afraid of it. And that's my tip for you. So we'll see. Maybe your research will bear that out. Maybe it won't. I don't know. So I'm gonna wrap this up. I've got two more questions for you. So one is, you talked about the importance of sort of proving it works. It's not just about putting beautiful things out there and hoping for awareness. So how do you measure the success of your storytelling? What are the things you look at? What are the, when you get in on a Monday, what's the exciting chart or stat that you want to see?
It's going to come down to the very basic thing of what products are doing well.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because that's why you storytell, don't you? You storytell so that there is an impact on your bottom line. Mm-hmm. And that's what I look at. And to me, I think that's what brand professionals should do. We are in the business of brand, and that really is the core. That's really where you want to make the impact. Otherwise, what's the point of the business existing? So
not just to get golden lions, right?
No.
we all like one though.
Yes.
And so my last question for you is there a burning story you have inside you as a professional or as an aspiring writer or filmmaker or whatever? Is there a story that you've always wanted to tell and you've not had the opportunity to?
Yes, but it's a bit of a crazy one.
I'm all ears.
Okay.
That's good.
So you know how social media influences us to a point where people do everything and anything.
Yeah.
What happens if you come to a point where no one is unique anymore, and so you gain fame maybe because you've lost a limb or you've lost an eye, and that becomes what beauty is, and then everybody follows on that trend, and then you go around in a cycle again?
So I think there's a sort of Black Mirror-esque element to that, and I've actually just come back from South by Southwest where I saw Charlie Brooker speak, and it was amazing. Have you heard of the concept of Instagram face?
No.
So it's this idea that people are producing apps now like Facetune because there is an ideal look for Instagram. There's all this generic beauty, and it's kind of Asian eyes, Eastern European cheekbones, African lips, Western nose, and all this kind of stuff. And you are starting to see that. There is a certain look that you see across things. And I think, the concept that we can redefine, I think it's a certain amount is happening at the moment. There's a redefinition going on of what is beautiful. And I think beautiful, once everybody looks the same, nobody's outstanding. But this has a reflection on advertising and brands, because I have this fear right now that this cult of optimization, we're all following what works rather than what's different.
Yes.
We're all jumping on trends to try and capitalize on the trend. But if everyone's jumping on the same trend, no one's jumping on the same trend. And one of the things if you've not read it, there was an article that went viral this year by Alex Murrell called The Age of Average. And in it, he sort of asks and answers the question around why is it that coffee shops from Osaka to Oregon via wherever all kind of look the same. They've all got chalkboards with the daily specials on, and they've all got Italian espresso machines, and they're all playing sort of inoffensive world beats, and the the baristas are all wearing sort of leather aprons, and why would one in Japan and one in America, one in Europe look the same? And it's because we've optimized the coffee shop. And I'm as guilty as anyone for sort of wandering in it and going, this is a rather nice middle of the road atmosphere. I can sit here and pretend I'm an author or something, But there's a lot like that. The shapes of cars have sort of blended into each other over the last 30 years. And I think this is the biggest issue facing brands and marketers, is the ability to differentiate in an age where the data is sort of pushing us all towards optimizing and being the same. Theresa, thank you so much for spending the time with us and coming out to this studio, which is beautiful, but I realize is in the middle of nowhere.
It's lovely.
Ulu, as we call it in Singapore. And I would like to thank you for watching or listening, if you're listening through Spotify or Apple. This is The Business of Storytelling. If it's your first time, please don't forget to like and subscribe and share and tell everyone about it. We'll have more coming soon. I want to thank our generous sponsor, Vimeo, as well. The platform with everything you need to make, manage, and share brilliant videos at vimeo.com. Thank you very much.